With all that might be going on in your life or in the world, hopefully celebrating Christmas Day or Christmas Eve or both was an opportunity for a little respite, you could say, so to speak. Spend it with your family. That might not be a respite for some of you, depending upon the insanity of your family. But we come to this Sunday and we celebrate the Holy Family. And it really is essential in creation. The family itself is that first, you could say, cell, so to speak, of the body of the church. And in it needs to be healthy. God wants it to be healthy. And so he shares with us his family so that we will respond, profess his son, and become a member of his family forever. That's the hope, that's the goal. But it's challenging in today's society and culture. You know, I think we look around and we see a lot of things happening and we think the sky's falling in. And in some respects, that it might feel like that, and it has for different generations. But in particular, ours faces a whole host of challenges to living out the vocation of family life. I don't know if you remember Paul Harvey. Raise your hand if you remember Paul Harvey. Yeah, everybody's got gray hair or of a particular age. I only know Paul Harvey because, my dad used to listen to 570 WSYR in his car all the time. So that's how I came to know all these different people, by listening to that. And Paul Harvey used to say at the end of it, does anybody remember that? Say it. Now you know the rest of the story. This story is incredibly important, but Paul Harvey, he was a Christian, and he had an understanding of society and culture, and he had a great love for the country. And years ago, it was 1965 that he apparently, 64 is when he wrote it, but then he read something over the air, and it took off. And now because of social media, it's kind of made its comeback. People hear it and whatnot. He even made an appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast. And it's fascinating to hear it because it's very prophetic. I think it's not as prophetic as it is just, it's a great observation of what's happening. And so he said, it's titled, If I Were the Devil. I want to read some of that to you, cut some lines out just for time's sake. You can Google it and look it up, or if you're on social media, you can find it pretty quickly. If I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whisperers with the wisdom of a serpent. I'd whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old, I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves until each in its turn was consumed. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. Soon, I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing. It's really astute, right? It's a great observation. I think everybody can nod their heads to the different points that he makes. Very poetic way, being mindful that, of course, there is a force at work against God's plan. And if you were the devil, you'd want to destroy family. I think at the core of this is relationships and family. And unfortunately, families experience divisions and breakups for a whole host of reasons. And of course, it's always a tragedy when it happens. Yet, we see in the Holy Family another way right? We might not be able to control certain aspects in our family life, but the ones that we can, it's vital to look to the Holy Family and to follow their way. Lest we just think, as we look at them in these beautiful statues, that, hey, two saints and the Son of God, perfect, right? I can't necessarily relate to them. But I would say that today's gospel helps us to understand that they were flesh and blood like the rest of us. Of course, without sin for Jesus, like Mary didn't sin, she was born without original sin, but there is an element of family life that is just plain human. And we can see in this, so let's kind of recap what takes place. They go to Jerusalem like good Jews would as a family, but they would be with their whole family. Maybe some of you, I don't know, in the Italian, like it's all the cousins and everything can barely fit in the house. Like you can imagine a caravan of those people moving and going to Jerusalem. And as your kids are kind of older, right, just as they're no longer little ones, they start to be, 10, 11, 12, you don't really care what they're doing because they're with family, right? Unless, of course, someone's screaming because something happened, so you hear something break, right? Like then you go running. But for the most part, you feel like that's kind of safe, right? That you can leave them together. And that the olders maybe looked after the younger. So that's kind of what's happening as they're traveling back from Jerusalem to go to Nazareth. And this is like a 60-mile trip, so it's not a quick just walk down the street kind of thing. And so you're together in this caravan. We can certainly relate to the fact that you might not know where your kid is. And then all of a sudden, they recognize this. And maybe you can relate to this. As an uncle, I can relate to this when I was responsible for the nieces or nephews, right? Like you're out with them, and all of a sudden you lose sight. Terror ensues. And then you're looking, and you're trying to find. What would that have been like if it was 3 days? There is all sorts of anxiety welling up in you. I'm sure parents have this. Older parents who have older kids, I know that you still get stuck in your anxiety about your kids, about their safety, about their security. Coupled with the fact that Mary and Joseph are like, this is the Son of God. What are we going to say about this if we can't find him? So back to the city to look for him. And you would do it with intentionality. You probably wouldn't sleep, but you'd have to work by the light of day. So having to go to bed every night with the anxiety of where is he, right? So eventually coming upon him, you probably would say something similar, like, dude, we were worried about you. Why didn't you tell us? We're so anxious. You see this human interaction, right? Like this is a family that knows what it's like to be stressed, right? To keep our eyes, to lose our eyesight sometimes on what's most important. This wasn't like a sin on Mary and Joseph's part. This was just an imperfection. It's family life. And in this, of course, God permits this so that he can reveal something about himself to the world and that we can also then see that what he's doing for us and that we can relate to the Holy Family. So Jesus' response, of course, it's not disrespectful, but it's a reminder of what his purpose is. It's something greater that he is in store for. And so he's revealing slowly to the temple priests, right? They were captivated by him because this young man had this understanding that they couldn't get, right? Coming from a simple family. And he says, didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? And of course, now we look back and we say, duh, if Jesus was going to be anywhere, where would he be? Yeah, he'd have been in the temple, right? Like that makes sense. But for them, they had to go through this process of kind of understanding. And in that sharing of Mary's anxiety and Joseph's anxiety, we also see then in the Son an obedience to his parents. So it says that he went back and was obedient to them as he continued to grow in age and in wisdom. Because although he was the Son of God and he knew he was the Son of God, he was still a human and he had to grow in wisdom and understanding. So this is such an incarnational experience, right? Like we can look at what's going on around the world or in the culture, but you can control what's in your house. And you can also control how you relate to the world outside. That's the challenge of our time. That for many of us, or many of you, you might have grown up in a culture that was different, was more friendly to the particular biblical Christian values that we espouse and we want to hand on to our kids. That's not the case. For many of you, you're probably not persecuted or anything like that, but there's a general apathy, and sometimes there is an animus. And behind that, we know the prince of darkness wants to just slowly draw us in to living like the rest of people do, to kind of kowtow to the pressure and then to just start to make slow compromises with things. Before you know that, you'll be all in. And you'll find that that does not bring you a sense of peace and satisfaction. Right? To live the plan that God has for you in your family, you will be more safe and secure and protected. And in that family, we also have obligations to live. That opening prayer talked about the virtues of family life and the bonds of charity. Right? So what are the virtues of family life? I'm sure that you could name them and say, what do you hope that your kids will be with you, right? Or what do you hope of your parents? What do you hope of your siblings or your adult parents, right? Certainly respect, obedience, patience, love, trust, right? Clarity, love in the sense of charity, not just an emotional aspect of that, but truly willing the good of the other. These are all beautiful things. And the story in the Old Testament that we heard from was from Samuel. And this is an important thing because Hannah, who could not have a child, the center of her life was God. And so when Hannah went to pray at the temple, she was asking that God would give her a child. And Eli, who's the priest, is even looking at her like, are you drunk? This is what it says in the scripture. Are you drunk? Like, no way. You're beyond the years. You can't have kids. She said, I just want to make this appeal to God. And she said, if God answers this prayer, I will offer my son to him. And we can kind of see what that's a foreshadowing of. So she gets pregnant. She has this child. And even her husband is on board that they are going to gift Samuel to be raised, in a sense, as a priest, as a prophet, really. And he goes on to be this. But there's a sense of peace in her when she knew, because of God and that relationship with him, that God had gifted that child so that he would be given back. And Samuel goes on to kind of be this great influence in the life of Israel. It's very foreshadowing of Mary and what Mary does with her son, Jesus. But it also reminds us to come back to the point. Keep our eyes on Jesus. Keep God at the center of our family life, of our personal life. Keep him there. If we lose sight, then it's going to be hard, right? It's going to be difficult. The anxiety that's going to come with that, right? If Mary and Joseph had kept their eyes on Jesus, right, they wouldn't have lost him. So don't take anything for granted, right? We can't allow ourselves to just simply be on cruise control in a caravan and assuming that all is well. When we keep our eyes on Jesus, then we realize that the anxieties of life kind of simmer down to a more manageable way of living. In the second reading, we heard, this is the commandment, St. John said. He said, we should believe in the name of his son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he commanded us. And so as the Holy Family loved one another, let us imitate that love in our own lives, no matter what our families look like, and no matter the challenges that face us. If we keep our eyes on Jesus, we ask the Holy Family to journey with us, we're going to be all right. We profess.